Today, we're talking about the number one rule of property management, what you should never say to a tenant. First, to make sense of this rule, we need to understand the middleman phenomenon, or middle person to make it gender neutral. Although middleman rolls off the tongue a little easier, so we're gonna stick with that one. Middleman is a slang term for an intermediary that provides a service, but also charges a fee or a commission. Because of that, it's sort of built a negative connotation over time. But if you understand the concept of a middleman, you'll understand the concept of what you should never tell a tenant. Coming up, let's analyze this. Just like in real estate sales with buyers on one side and sellers on the other, tenants sit on one side across the table from landlords, and they each have different desires and perspectives. Because of this opposing relationship, they naturally tend to have an adversarial relationship with the other party. That is, even though they're working together for their common benefit, that is, the tenant gets a place to live and the landlord gets rental income, they tend to have an adversarial relationship because the tenant generally wants to pay less in rent and be able to do more, such as have dogs or paint walls whatever colors they want. Whereas a landlord wants to make less changes to the property, do less repairs, but collect more in rent. The same is true for buyers and sellers. Buyers want to pay less, sellers want to get more. There's no surprise here, but this natural dichotomy creates a tinderbox for emotions, guilt, appeals to pity, fake friendships, and drama. Now, this isn't to say that there aren't some landlords that don't have excellent relationships with their tenants or can be friends with their tenants and can get along. And the bottom line is, in almost any relationship, when things are going good, everybody's happy. It's when things get a little bit more complicated that friend relationships can very quickly turn ugly. Now, how does the middleman come into play with this, and what should I never tell a tenant? Let's explain the concept of the middleman phenomenon by talking about a property manager. I'm the property manager. A property manager is a classic middleman who is incentivized by both the tenant being happy and the owner being happy to make the entire transactional process of a tenancy significantly easier and stress-free for all parties involved. When both sides have clear expectations, hopefully set by that great property manager, and both sides follow the rules of the agreement that have been created, again, hopefully by that great property manager, then generally the level of stress in a tenancy can be very low. All of this is under the guidance of that middle person. See, the property manager doesn't just make the process of a landlord-tenancy relationship simpler by facilitating paperwork, photos, repairs, or putting a property on the market. A property manager is a classic case of the middleman. Somebody who can remove emotion from discussions, convey local norms of what customs or culture dictate happen in a certain rental market, balance the priorities of both the landlord and the tenant in a reasonable manner, of course, and conduct business in a communicative way so that nobody feels like they're left in the dark. Ultimately, they filter out the drama and get to the facts. They get to the bottom of things so that they can handle things in a reasonable manner, the nature of a middleman. Now let's make an example of no property manager involved. Tenant has problem, talks to owner. Hey owner, that faucet you worked on last time is leaking again. Owner's typical reaction, whiny tenant, go screw yourself. The owner may not actually say that, but that is a typical reaction because an owner, whether people consider it a business relationship or not, an owner has a psychological attachment to the property that they own. Whether they did the repairs on the property, they renovated the property, or they hired somebody to fix things. Anytime they get that message from the tenant that something of theirs is broken, something of the owner's is broken, stress levels by the nature of this relationship and the owner go up. Whether or not the owner whips back right away and says, screw you, or whips back right away and goes, no problem, I'll fix it right away. Stress levels increase right away. When stress levels go up, the likelihood of emotion and conflict go through the roof. Now let's include an example of a middleman, where perhaps the owner doesn't necessarily react with stress or, oh my gosh, the tenant's whining again. Let's include the example of a middleman. Tenant: the faucet the owner fixed is leaking again. Property manager, in a professional and communicative manner, let me see what I can find out so I can make sure that issue is resolved for you right away. Manager isn't giving anything away, but the manager is being communicative. That's so important in reducing people's stress. Now, the property manager, knowing what the problem might be, or based on the description of the tenant, could make phone calls. Hey plumber, we got a leaking faucet. How much do you think it's going to cost to fix this? Ballpark? Okay, perfect, great. Management rate? Even better. Hey owner, that faucet sprung a leak again. It's going to cost us about $125 to $150 to replace or fix or whatever. Are you okay with approving this repair so I could get this handled? Owner, no problem. Done. Owner's stress level is virtually zero because the owner gets the message, hey, here's the problem. But the owner also immediately gets, here's the solution. Owner all they have to do is reply and go, wow, okay, so I just got a problem. All I have to do is say, yeah, that's fine. My manager's taking care of it. They're looking out for this. Done. Stress levels barely increase when there's a middleman involved. It doesn't mean that the $150 wasn't painful to the owner, but the owner didn't have to think about, oh my gosh, how am I going to solve the problem? Who am I going to call? Who am I going to coordinate? This tenant, are they just whining? Are they serious? Like, what's going on? The owner believes the property manager is going to take care of them, and obviously it's very important to have a quality property manager. Now the property manager can turn around and go to the tenant, hey tenant, we have a licensed plumber on the way coming to take care of that problem for you. Sorry you had to deal with that inconvenience. Thank you so much for letting us know before the problem got worse. All of a sudden, all parties are happy and the problem is solved. This is contrasted with the example of a tenant complaining directly to an owner when maybe that owner is at work, they're stressed through the roof, and they snip back and say something in jest or not or in seriousness very quickly. Can't you fix it? Are you serious? Or some kind of snippy response that immediately elevates concerns on the tenant's side. That's the benefit of a property manager, is this sort of middleman approach that takes the emotion and stress out of problems. Here's an even better example. Tenant says, hey, owner, we've got ants. Owner quickly replies back and goes, well then why don't you put your dirty food in the trash and stop leaving leftovers out? Not a good idea. Ultimately, the best case for property is owner is happy, tenant is happy, because otherwise turnover happens. Turnover is expensive. Let's contrast that with a property manager. Tenant says, hey, we've got ants. Property manager, hey, I'm very sorry, but our rental agreement outlines that you're responsible for taking care of ants. However, we've got this great product at Home Depot that we could recommend. It's home defense. You could go spray it on the outside at night when you can see the ant trails, and that should put a dent in your ant population. Of course, we're not a pest control company, so you might consider contacting a pest control company or maybe even like an organic company to help you with your problem. But unfortunately, that is your responsibility. Now, the owner never had anything happen on their end of things. They didn't even hear about it, and they didn't even get charged for anything. Problem solved. Zero stress to owner, and the tenant's expectations were very clearly outlined, which shouldn't necessarily increase stress levels any more than, well, I guess I have to go kill some ants. This is super common, by the way. Tenants almost always try to ask for more and more services, so we have to keep their expectations in check as landlords or property managers. So having this property manager be a filter for emotion and stress levels actually creates less litigious situations where resentment builds so high on either side that so many self-managing landlords end up with those cocktail stories where they talk about nightmare scenarios they had with tenants or how they ended up in court with tenants, and guess what? Guess who usually wins in court? The tenants! That's where the expression tenants and toilets comes from. People don't want to deal with tenants and toilets because it can be stressful, and that emotion and stress combined creates a disastrous situation. That's why the middleman is so powerful. But what is the big secret? What should you never tell a tenant? Well, now that you understand this is exactly what you should never tell a tenant. Never, ever, ever, ever tell a tenant that you are the owner of the property. We're not suggesting lie. But here's a psychological fact that happens when you are the owner and you tell a tenant that you're the owner. As soon as a tenant knows who the owner is, every time they write that rent check, they picture the face of the owner and how maybe they're paying for that Beamer lease the owner has, or their mortgage, or whatever, and it builds resentment. The bottom line is, one human feels like they are giving somebody else something. It's very weird. When people rent from apartment complexes, they don't have this issue because it's a corporation. For some reason, that feels different. When people write checks to a property manager, it's like they're just paying to a company. Feels different. They pay their home loan to a bank. Feels different. But when they write a check to a homeowner and they see that homeowner buying beer at the grocery store, they're like, my rent's paying for that beer and I'm struggling to make the payment. That resentment, the fact is, there's nothing anybody can do about that. It happens. It can be avoided by preventing the tenant from finding out who the owner is. Again, we're not suggesting lie. I've got some suggestions here and some tips for how to actually handle this. But the biggest advice is, if you have a property manager, don't be that owner that wants to show their ego and show how great they are for when the tenant goes to move in. Here comes the owner with the key to that house. Hey, tenant, here are the keys to my house. You better take care of it now, you hear? That is such an ego trip. That's all that is. And it just goes downhill from there. And this happens even if you're a nice landlord. In fact, it pretty much especially happens if you're a nice landlord, because all of a sudden you become that tenant's concierge rather than a property manager. So there's some real dangers with the tenants having direct access to you as an owner, especially through like a cell phone or something where they can just text you problems all the time. It should really go through a property manager. Or the big tip of all of this, just don't tell the tenant you're the owner. So how does this work? Well, two things. One, if you hire a property manager, you should really have no interaction with the tenant anyway. So if you have a property manager, great. You have that anonymous nature of the tenant not knowing who you are. You're set. Option number two, you manage the property yourself. You should tell the tenant that you are the manager for the property. That's not lying. You are telling the tenant, I'm the manager for the property. If they then ask you bluntly, are you the owner? Or they say, I know you're the owner, here are some suggested responses. If they say, are you the owner? The response is, I'm the property manager. And then ideally divert to some kind of different topic. If they do confront you and say, I know you're the owner, and they expect a response from you, the response might be something like, and you're not lying, you say, I am a part owner of the property, but I'm not the sole decision maker. And if you are the 100% owner of that property, then say, I do own the property, but I'm not the decision maker, or I'm not the sole decision maker for the property. If you own the property in a trust or with your family or your wife or spouse or whatever, you've got partners that you could say you're just a part owner. If you do fully own the property yourself, and you can't sort of use the, well, I'm just a partner example, then you can say, I'm not the sole decision maker, because there are plenty of people who consult their fathers, their mothers, their mentors, their pastor, or whatever on landlord-tenant advice. So it is still a multi-part decision process. By saying that, you create and you establish the facade of a third party. This is what we call in the industry a third-party reply. Tenant says, hey, can you trim my palm trees for me? I don't know, let me check with all the parties involved and get back to you right away. Now you have to make sure to follow up. If you're managing yourself, you want to be communicative like a professional property manager. But you can still maintain that emotional withdrawal that the nature of a third party gives you by being able to blow this question off and not have a confrontation right there. Because if you respond to the tenant and say, no, I'm not trimming your trees, trim them yourself. That just creates resentment. By being able to take a step back and say, let me check with all the owners involved. I'm going to go ask them. I think it's a good idea. It seems reasonable or whatever. Then you ask and later you decide, or all the parties involved decide, hey, it's just too expensive. And in the rental agreement, we do have you as the tenant responsible for landscape maintenance. Then that's the reply. And then it's all said and done. So by no means, we want to make it very, very clear, we're not suggesting lie to your tenants, but you want to separate yourself from being the sole decision maker. For example, if the tenants know that you're the owner, the last thing you should ever do is go to the property and constantly be the handyman for the property, because guess what you're becoming now? You're becoming the concierge for that tenant, where they could text you for every little repair and they know you're going to run over and fix it. It's awesome for tenants to have owners that just come fix everything. If it goes through a property manager and it goes through the correct means, now all of a sudden the property manager can maybe even 50% of the problems solve over the phone, like the ant example I gave. And the other problems they can deal with by going through the normal processes and channels, which are a little bit more inconvenient for the tenant, which oftentimes lead to, hey tenant, maybe you should just replace the light bulb yourself rather than have us do it. Now here's something really cool. If the tenants don't know that you're the owner, and you're a handy type, and you work with your property manager to go take care of repairs yourself, like little repairs, the tenant that doesn't think you're the owner oftentimes will share complaints or secrets with you about the property manager, the owner, which is you, or the building or the neighboring tenants, which is really, really kind of cool insight that they just volunteer to you, but you have to be a good actor. Don't blow your cover. And again, if they ask you bluntly, we have already established what you should say if they bluntly ask you if you're the owner. Now, what about contracts? People always wonder, well, wait a minute, won't the owner's name be on a contract? No, at least not in the state of California. The California Association of Realtors uses a standard residential lease agreement that is signed by the tenant and the landlord. But landlord is defined as the person who's in control of managing the property, which could either be the property manager or the owner. Now, what about the public records that show who the owners are, and then people take those names and just Facebook who you are? That's definitely possible. Some folks like to put their properties in a trust that they label the Mickey Mouse Trust, or they form an LLC like 123 East Main Street, just some kind of generic name. But it's also not that hard to go to title companies these days, pull deeds, and see exactly who quit the property into that LLC. So the correct way to really be fully anonymous on a property is to buy it within an LLC. That way the original deed that gives you the ownership to the property doesn't even have your names on it. that is the only way to get your data off the public records when you go to buy something. So you have to do it before you close escrow on the property. Hope those insights were helpful. Be an anonymous owner, don't lie to your tenants, and understand the benefits of the middleman. See you later.